The first sign that something was wrong was the smell. It was a damp, earthy scent that clung to the back of the throat, the kind of smell you associate with old basements and forgotten corners of the world. Sarah first noticed it in the laundry room, a small, windowless space tucked away behind the kitchen. At first, she dismissed it. With two young children, Jack, who was 7, and Chloe, who was 5, strange odors were a part of the household symphony. It could be anything: a forgotten wet towel, a pair of muddy sneakers, or one of Jack's science experiments left to fester. She spent an afternoon clearing out the room, scrubbing the floors, and washing every fabric item she could find. But the smell lingered, a stubborn, unwelcome guest. A week later, she saw the stain. It was a dark, spidery patch spreading across the drywall just behind the washing machine. It was greenish-black, and when she touched it, the wall felt soft and damp. Mold, she muttered to herself, a wave of annoyance washing over her. It was just another problem on the endless list of home repairs that came with their charming but aging house. That evening, she pointed it out to her husband, Tom. He glanced at it from the doorway, his briefcase still in his hand. "Just looks like a little mildew, hun." He was a man who lived on the surface of things, who saw problems not as intricate puzzles to be solved, but as simple obstacles to be dealt with quickly and efficiently. "I'll pick up some of that special bleach from the hardware store on my way home tomorrow. It'll be gone by the weekend." Sarah wasn't so sure. The patch seemed to grow larger each day, the smell becoming more pervasive, seeping out of the laundry room and into the hallway. Chloe started complaining that her tummy hurt whenever she was near that side of the house, and Jack, who had a sensitive nose, began to get frequent headaches. Sarah's maternal instincts, that primal and often irrational alarm system, began to ring louder. She tried to talk to Tom about it again, her voice tight with a worry he didn't seem to share. "I really think it's more than mildew, Tom. The wall is soft. I think we have a leak." Tom sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of a long day at the office. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she knew meant he was trying to be patient. "Sarah, we just had the pipes checked last year. It's an old house. It gets damp. Let me try the bleach first. If that doesn't work, we can call someone. No need to panic and spend a fortune on a plumber for a little spot on the wall." His dismissiveness was a familiar ache in her chest. Tom wasn't unkind, but he was practical to a fault, a man who believed in clear-cut, logical solutions. He operated in a world of spreadsheets and data, while Sarah navigated the murkier, more intuitive realm of feelings and gut instincts. Frustrated and feeling unheard, she decided to take matters into her own hands. The next morning, after Tom had left for work and the kids were at school, she looked up local plumbers. She found one with dozens of 5-star reviews. His name was Mike. The man who answered the phone had a calm, gravelly voice that immediately put her at ease. She described the problem, the smell, the dampness, the dark stain. He listened patiently without interruption. "Sounds like you might have a slow leak in the wall, ma'am. I can be there in about an hour." When Mike arrived, he was exactly as she had pictured him from his voice. An older man, probably in his late 50s, with kind eyes crinkled at the corners and work-roughened hands that spoke of decades of experience. He moved with a quiet confidence, his toolbox clanking softly as he walked. He didn't say much at first, simply nodding as Sarah showed him the laundry room. He knelt, his knees cracking in protest, and examined the stain on the wall. He ran his fingers over it, then pressed gently. He tapped the surrounding area, listening intently to the sound. He then went out to his truck and returned with a small, sophisticated-looking device, which he explained was a moisture meter. The device beeped insistently as he ran it over the wall, the reading climbing far higher than Sarah would have expected. "Yep, you've got a lot of moisture in there," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Definitely a leak. The smell, the dampness. It's a classic case. I'll need to cut into the drywall to see what we're dealing with." Sarah's stomach fluttered with a nervous mix of vindication and dread. She was right, but what would he find? She nodded, giving him permission. For the next 20 minutes, the sound of a small handsaw filled the small room. Mike was careful and precise, cutting a neat rectangle out of the wall. As the piece of drywall came free, the smell intensified, a thick, cloying wave of decay that made Sarah's eyes water. She instinctively took a step back. Mike, however, leaned closer, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark cavity of the wall. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the washing machine in its sleep cycle. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Plumbers fixed leaks. They found burst pipes and faulty connections. It was a dirty job, but a straightforward one. Yet Mike wasn't moving. He was just staring into the wall. Finally, He switched off his flashlight and slowly stood up, turning to face her. His expression had changed. The professional calm was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of gravity and something that looked unnervingly like pity. He gestured for her to step out of the laundry room and into the hallway, away from the open wall. He pulled her gently aside, his voice dropping to a low, serious whisper. He looked her straight in the eyes, ensuring he had her full attention. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely audible. "You need to listen to me very carefully. That's not mold." Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. "What do you mean it's not mold? What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The air in the hallway felt suddenly cold. Mike took a deep breath, his gaze steady and serious. He was choosing his words with immense care, like a man defusing a bomb. "In my line of work, you see a lot of things inside walls. Bad pipes, nests of rats, rotted studs. But I've never seen anything like this." He motioned for her to follow him, not back to the laundry room, but to her kitchen, where they could sit at the small breakfast table. He wanted her to be sitting down. "When I cut into the wall," he continued, his voice low, "I found the source of the leak. It's a small pinhole in a copper pipe. Easy fix. But the water wasn't just soaking into the insulation and the drywall. It was collecting in something." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "There's a metal box inside the wall, ma'am. A lockbox. It looks like it was sealed in there, behind the drywall. The leak dripped right onto it, and over time, some of the water got inside. Whatever is in there, it's been stewing. That's the smell you've been noticing. It's not mold. It's the smell of wet, decaying paper, and something else I can't quite place." Sarah stared at him, her blood running cold. A box? A hidden box in the wall of their laundry room? It made no sense. They had bought the house 5 years ago. Had it been there all along? A secret from a previous owner? A box? Left by who? Mike shook his head slowly. This was the hard part. The drywall that was covering it. It's newer than the rest of the wall. The texture is slightly different. The paint job a little too perfect. This wasn't done when the house was built. I'd say this section of the wall was opened up and resealed within the last few years. And the box, he said, his eyes filled with a deep, unsettling sadness. The box wasn't dusty. It was clean. It hasn't been in there for decades. It's recent. The implication hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. Recent, in the last few years, since they had owned the house. And there was only one person who spent weekends working on projects around the house, who had repainted the entire hallway and laundry room 2 summers ago, claiming he wanted to brighten the place up. Tom. "I can seal the wall back up and you can pretend I never saw a thing," Mike said gently, his voice a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. "It's your home, your business. But the leak is real. And if that box is what I think it is, the water damage is the least of your problems. I pulled it out. It's on the floor in there. It's not locked." For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like ice in her veins. A part of her, the part that loved her husband and the life they had built, wanted to scream at Mike to put it back, seal the wall, and leave. She wanted to unknow this. She wanted to go back to an hour ago when her biggest problem was a patch of mildew. But she couldn't. She thought of Chloe's stomach aches, of Jack's headaches. She thought of Tom's easy dismissal of her concerns, his insistence on handling it himself. It wasn't just practical. It was calculated. He had been protecting the secret. "Show me," she whispered, her voice barely her own. He led her back to the laundry room. There on the floor, sitting in a small puddle of grimy water, was a black metal fireproof box, about the size of a shoebox. It looked ordinary, the kind of thing you'd buy at an office supply store. But in the context of the hole in her wall and the sick, sweet smell of decay, it looked sinister. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she knelt, her hands shaking. Mike stood back, giving her space, his presence a silent, steady support. With a deep, shuddering breath, she reached for the latch. It clicked open. The smell that rose from the box was overwhelming. It was the smell of damp earth, of rot. But underneath it all, the unmistakable scent of money. The box was full of it. Stacks of $100 bills, bound in rubber bands. But they were water-damaged. The edges soft and beginning to bleed ink. A dark, ugly sludge, like a malevolent form of mold, was growing on the top bundles. That was the source of the stain on the wall. But it wasn't the money that made her gasp for air. Tucked beneath the stacks of cash was a small sealed plastic bag. Inside it were 2 items, a passport and a driver's license. Sarah's hands trembled so violently she could barely lift the bag. She didn't need to look closely. The face staring back at her from the passport photo was unquestionably her husband's. The eyes, the set of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow. It was Tom, but the name printed underneath was not Tom. It was David Anderson. The driver's license had the same face, the same fake name. The world tilted on its axis. The laundry room, her home, her life, it all felt like a movie set, a carefully constructed facade. Who was David Anderson? Who was the man she had been married to for 10 years? The father of her children? The man who kissed her goodbye every morning? The spreadsheets, the long hours, the business trips he took? The sudden bonus that paid for their new car last year? It all clicked into place in a horrifying new configuration. Her husband had a secret life, and the evidence of it was rotting inside their walls. She looked up at Mike, her eyes wide with terror. He saw the recognition, the dawning horror on her face. He had seen enough. He stepped forward and spoke, his voice firm but kind, a stranger anchoring her in a world that had just dissolved. "Ma'am," he said, meeting her terrified gaze. "I'm a plumber. My job is to fix leaks. This," he said, gesturing to the box, "is not a leak. I don't know what your husband does, and I don't want to. But this is the kind of thing that people get hurt over. You have children in this house. My professional advice is to fix the pipe and seal the wall. But my personal advice? My personal advice is that you and your kids shouldn't be here when he comes home." His words sliced through her panic, giving her clarity. He was right. This wasn't about a marriage falling apart. This was about danger. The man she lived with was a stranger, a liar, a man with a fake identity and a box of rotting cash hidden in the wall. What else was he capable of? She thought of Jack and Chloe, of their innocent faces and their easy laughter, and a fierce protective instinct she never knew she possessed rose up inside her. "Thank you," she said to Mike, her voice shaking but resolute. "Thank you. Can you just leave everything as it is? Don't fix the pipe. Don't do anything. Just send me the bill." He simply nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. He packed his tools in silence, and as he left, he turned at the door. "Be safe, ma'am." The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Sarah was already moving. The plumber's final words echoed in her ears. "Be safe. You shouldn't be here when he comes home." She ran upstairs, her mind a whirlwind of terror and adrenaline. She grabbed 2 duffel bags from the top of the closet. There was no time to think, only to act. She threw clothes in for Jack and Chloe, their favorite toys, their toothbrushes. Then she went to her own closet, her hands grabbing at random items. All the while, a single thought repeated itself in her mind, a frantic mantra of survival. "I packed my kids' bags before he could come home." The duffel bags felt impossibly heavy as she dragged them down the stairs. Her movements were frantic, clumsy. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric was a thunderclap in the unnatural silence of the house. The hole in the laundry room wall seemed to breathe, exhaling the sickly sweet smell of rot and lies, a smell that now seemed to permeate every room. Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, a monument to a life that had never been real. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, her gaze sweeping over the living room. The framed photos on the mantelpiece mocked her. Their wedding day, the day Jack was born, Chloe's first steps. In every picture, Tom was smiling, the picture of a devoted husband and father. Had it all been a performance? Was his love for her, for the children, just another part of the character he was playing? A wave of nausea washed over her. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. She needed to be smart. Mike's words echoed again. This is the kind of thing people get hurt over. She needed money. Untraceable money. Credit cards were out of the question. Tom would get an alert on his phone the second she made a purchase. Cash. They kept an emergency stash of cash in a hollowed-out book in the study, a book titled Great Expectations. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. She ran to the study, pulled the book from the shelf, and fumbled it open. Inside were $2,000. It was meant for a natural disaster, an earthquake, a flood. This, she thought, was its own kind of disaster. She stuffed the cash into her purse. She took one last look at the house, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. She grabbed the kids' iPads, a necessary distraction, and her own laptop. Then she walked out the front door, not bothering to lock it, and didn't look back. The drive to the elementary school was a blur. She operated on autopilot, her mind a chaotic storm of fear and what-ifs. What was Tom involved in? Gangs? The mob? Was David Anderson a criminal? A witness and protection? The possibilities were all terrifying. She tried to slow her breathing, to smooth the frantic expression from her face before she had to face the children. She was 5 minutes early for pickup. She parked across the street, watching the school gates, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every passing car made her jump. Was he watching? Did he have a way of knowing she'd found the box? The plumber? Mike. Tom would come home, see the hole, and know. He would know that she knew, and then he would come for them. The thought spurred a fresh jolt of adrenaline. The school bell rang, and a moment later, a river of children poured out onto the sidewalk. She saw them immediately. Jack, his backpack almost as big as he was, talking animatedly to a friend. And Chloe, her blonde hair in pigtails, skipping along beside him. The fierce, desperate love she felt for them was a physical pain in her chest. She forced a bright smile as they clambered into the car. "Hey, you two! Guess what? We're going on a surprise adventure." Jack's eyes lit up. "Are we going to Disneyland?" "Not quite," she said, her voice strained but cheerful. "Something even better. A super cool hotel with a swimming pool." Chloe clapped her hands. "Yay, can we get ice cream?" "All the ice cream you want," Sarah promised, her eyes meeting Jack's in the rearview mirror. He was quieter, more observant than his sister. He frowned slightly. "But why, Mom? It's a school night. And what about Dad?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. "Dad has to work late," she improvised, her hands slick on the steering wheel. "This is a special treat just for us. It's a secret mission." The word mission was a stroke of genius. Jack loved spy games. His suspicion melted away, replaced by excitement. "A secret mission? Cool. Are there bad guys?" "No bad guys," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Just us, the good guys." She drove not towards the freeway that led to their usual vacation spots, but in the opposite direction, towards a cluster of anonymous hotels near the airport. She paid for the room in cash, using a name she made up on the spot. Smith, the most forgettable name she could think of. The room was sterile and impersonal, smelling of disinfectant and stale air. It had 2 queen beds and a small, bolted-down television. To Sarah, it felt like the safest place on earth. For the next few hours, she kept up the charade. They went to the pool, and she watched Jack and Chloe splash and laugh, their joyful shrieks echoing in the humid, chlorinated air. For a few moments, watching them, she could almost pretend this was normal. But the terror was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Later, they ordered pizza and ice cream to the room, and she let them watch cartoons until they finally drifted off to sleep in the bed closest to the window, their small bodies curled up together. Only then, in the quiet darkness of the hotel room, did Sarah allow herself to crumble. She sat on the other bed, the laptop on her knees, and the facade of the fun, adventurous mom dissolved, leaving behind a terrified woman whose life had been detonated. The man she loved was a phantom. Her marriage was a lie. Her children were in danger. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. She cried for the life she thought she had, for the trust that had been so completely shattered. After a long while, her tears subsided, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Crying wouldn't protect her children. Hiding wouldn't solve this. She had to know who she was running from. She had to understand the threat. She wiped her eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and opened the laptop. The screen cast a pale, ghostly light on her face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. Then, with a determination that came from the deepest well of her love for her children, she typed the name from the passport into the search bar. David Anderson. She clicked enter and held her breath, waiting for the secrets of the man she called her husband to appear on the screen. The search results loaded instantly, a digital flood of information that was both overwhelming and useless. Thousands of David Andersons. There were doctors, lawyers, real estate agents, and a high school football coach from Ohio. None of them had her husband's face. Sarah's initial surge of adrenaline began to wane, replaced by a gnawing frustration. How do you find a ghost? How do you search for a man whose very name is a lie? She tried to think, her mind numb with exhaustion and fear. She needed a detail, an anchor in the sea of data. She thought back over the 10 years she'd known Tom. He'd always been vague about his life before they met, claiming a quiet, unremarkable childhood in a small town in Oregon that he never seemed to want to revisit. He'd said his parents had died in a car crash when he was in college, leaving him with no family. It was a sad story, one that had made her feel protective of him. Now she saw it for what it was, a perfectly crafted wall to keep anyone from looking too closely. Oregon. It was a place to start. She modified her search. David Anderson, Oregon. The results narrowed but were still too broad. She needed more. What else did she know? She remembered a drunken conversation from years ago, at a neighborhood barbecue. One of their neighbors had been talking about his time working on an oil rig in Texas. Tom, who was usually quiet in these conversations, had laughed and said, "I did a summer in a place like that. Hated every second of it. Hot, dirty, and full of guys who'd kill you for a winning lottery ticket." At the time, she'd dismissed it as an odd, uncharacteristic remark. Now, it felt like a clue. With trembling fingers, she typed, "David Anderson, Oregon, Texas robbery." She pressed Enter. The first link was from a Houston newspaper, dated 8 years ago. The headline made the air leave her lungs. "One dead, one arrested, one at large after botched bank heist." She clicked the link. Her blood turned to ice. The article detailed a violent armored car robbery outside a bank. 3 men had ambushed the guards. In the ensuing shootout, one guard had been wounded, one of the robbers had been killed, and a second, identified as Ryan Miller, had been apprehended at the scene. The third suspect, the article said, had escaped in the chaos with an estimated $2 million in cash. His name was David Anderson, and there, embedded in the digital newsprint, was his picture. It was a driver's license photo, the same one from the license in the box, but younger. His face was leaner, his eyes harder, colder. There was none of the gentle warmth she had come to know as her husband's smile. This was the face of a stranger, a criminal, the face of a man who had participated in a crime that left one man dead and another wounded. The money, the $2 million. The rotting cash in the box was a fraction of it. Where was the rest? The thought made her feel sick. The name of the arrested man, Ryan Miller, snagged her attention. It was familiar. She scrolled through her mental files, the archives of her life with Tom. Ryan Miller. Where had she heard that name? And then it hit her. A memory so clear it was as if it happened yesterday. It was from their first year of marriage. Tom had woken up from a nightmare, sweating and shaking. She'd held him, asking what was wrong. He'd been distraught, and after a lot of coaxing, he told her he'd just heard that an old friend from college, a man named Ryan, had died in a car accident. He had cried in her arms that night, mourning the loss of his friend. It had been a lie. All of it. Ryan Miller wasn't dead. He was in a Texas prison, serving a life sentence. Tom hadn't been mourning a friend. He had been crying out of fear or guilt over the partner he had abandoned. The whole elaborate story of his life, his orphan past, his quiet upbringing, his very name, was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to hide the truth of David Anderson, the escaped felon. He hadn't built a new life. He had built a hiding place. She and the children weren't his family. They were his cover. They were the props in his performance of a normal life, a shield to protect him from the ghosts of his violent past. In that moment, something inside Sarah shifted. The fear that had been paralyzing her crystallized into a diamond-hard point of rage and resolve. The tears were gone. The heartbroken wife was gone. In her place was a mother protecting her young. She looked over at Jack and Chloe, sleeping soundly, their faces relaxed and innocent in the dim light of the hotel room. They deserved a real life, not to be unwitting accomplices in a fugitive's disguise. They deserved a future free from the shadow of that rotting money and the violence it represented. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, making her jump. The screen lit up with his name. Tom. The lie stared at her from the screen. She watched it ring, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. It stopped, then immediately started again. She silenced it. A text message appeared. "Sarah, where are you? I'm home. I saw the wall. Please don't do anything crazy. We need to talk. I can explain." Explain? How could he explain a decade of lies? How could he explain a dead man and a partner left to rot in prison? Another text came through. "I did it all for us, for you and the kids, so we could have this life." The manipulation, the shameless attempt to cast himself as a misguided hero, was the final confirmation she needed. It wasn't love that motivated him. It was selfishness. It was about his survival, his comfort, his perfect hiding place. She was just a part of the scenery. She turned the phone off and tossed it onto the other bed. The night was long. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the city lights, her mind clear and sharp for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She was no longer a victim of his story. She was the author of her own. When the first gray light of dawn broke the horizon, she knew exactly what she had to do. She woke the children gently. "Time to get up, sleepyheads," she said, her voice calm and steady. They dressed and she led them out of the hotel, not back towards the highway of escape, but towards the heart of the city. She didn't drive erratically. Her hands were firm on the wheel. She drove past a park, a library, a courthouse, and finally pulled into the parking lot of a large, imposing brick building. "Mom, where are we?" Jack asked, peering out the window. Sarah turned in her seat and looked at her children, her heart overflowing with a fierce, painful love. "This is where the bad guys end," she said softly. "This is where our new story begins." She took their hands, Chloe's small fingers wrapping trustingly around hers, Jack's grip a little tighter, sensing the gravity of the moment. Together, the three of them walked up the steps and through the glass doors of the police station, leaving the ghost of Tom and the nightmare of David Anderson behind them in the morning sun. She was walking into an uncertain future, one that would be filled with questions and hardships. But for the first time in a very long time, it would be a future built on truth. It would be her own. The choices we make out of fear can imprison us, but the choices we make out of love can set us free. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to walk through it to protect what matters most. Sometimes the most heroic act is to simply tell the truth and face the consequences, clearing the way for a new beginning. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a message of hope and the strength to choose their own future.